I have 8 years of experience working in the education technology space, working on digital products, services, and software. 4 to 6 of those years are in product management, and I've had opportunities to work as a product owner within certain capacities of that time, functioning on the execution of the digital roadmap and backlog. Hi. So how I think about product management is really the office, the function, the part of the organization that really thinks about the market problem, the customer problem, and the discovery of what those problems might be, or another word for problem would be opportunities, or jobs to be done. Ultimately, the goal is to really identify both the marketability of the idea and what the idea is to the end customer, paired with really the delivery or execution side of those things, and really driving work forward to make sure the execution teams, the delivery teams, are working on the highest prioritized work for the most value for both the business and the customer. I also kind of think about product management as a way of life. It's really about the art or the science of synthesizing a number of data sets from, again, the business perspective, qualitative, quantitative data, from a market sensing, customer insight perspective, from business accountability, profitability, and product performance perspective, to make sure that the business is hitting its business needs while also solving for customer needs. The three things that I bring to any team is my ability to really discern what the customer needs are versus learned customer behavior. I learned this through my time at Pearson Education, and really kind of grew my strengths even within my role at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, to really help them identify, how do we think about the customer journey? How do we measure the customer journey? Who those customers are through the customer journey, to really inform then market segmentation, both from who are the key accounts and clients, to the different user personas and the end users. Working in education, it's really complex because decision makers and end users are not always the same, and there's many people interfacing within the platform and the end digital experience, and so really able to carve out the ability to understand their needs using prototyping, qualitative and quantitative tactics, to even comparing market research to product behavior. I also I build teams, I build alignment. And so really tying both what the execution side is doing to the discovery, and really aligning that to the strategic goals of the organization. And the third thing I bring is really a business acumen to make sure we continue to be profitable while delivering customer. I think for epics, I think it's really important to define the characteristics of both who the customer is, to really identify the who, and identify the what. Like, what are they trying to do? There's a couple frameworks that I've used in the past. I think one of the ones that I really like is really the job to be done framework, and how the job to be done framework helps articulate epic stories and the context needed for the team. And so really getting into, what are the customer pain points? What are they trying to solve for? What's the context of the situation? And then ultimately then, like, what's the definition of done, thinking about those the pains, the gains, and the context of what they're trying to achieve. I think in addition, one of the strengths that I have is the user interface experience, user interface research. Most of my time working in interfacing and doing my market research with customers is around a human-centered design. So not only identifying problems, but continually to check in with customers to test to make sure we're heading in the right direction with prototyping, et cetera. With stories, I think that's where you start getting into the how. And though the team ultimately needs to drive the how work, I think it's starting to break down and being realistic around the capability, the capacity, and really making sure what we can achieve to get the MVP or the smallest incremental of work. The best value that I bring is I continually test hypotheses and assumptions. Early on in my career, and just what I've done and how I've grown, and in the way I approach a human-centered kind of design approach, is that everything I'm hearing from internal and external stakeholders, whether it's around operational efficiencies or capacities, to what we need to market an idea, to what we need to actually deliver the idea in the business case in between, is why is it that way? Why does it have to be that way? And how do we know it's that way? And so I think what I bring to an organization, and with my experience at Pearson and the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, both known for quality, efficacy, and outcome-driven work, is to continue to identify outcomes and test to those, identify where those assumptions might be, and what do we need to ultimately deliver to achieve those outcomes. This is actually a new terminology for me, and I've recently came across it in the last little while. As I've been looking for my new role, I've more familiar with KPIs or outcome-driven work. We also, within my healthcare background, we used PDSAs, which is, I think, very similar. But essentially, how can we continue to identify objectives and measure progress to those objectives, while also identifying opportunities to improve how we are measuring and the objective itself. And I think that's something that I bring to any organization. One of my strengths as well is within the data analytics, and to make sure that we have the ability to not only create an experience that's measurable, but make sure we're capturing that experience, and we have the data pipeline in place, and then the way to effectively understand and synthesize the data. I think too many times there can be a lot of manual processes in understanding product performance, business performance, customer success, and customer interaction. And so anything I can do to identify where to improve that and to achieve objectives and key results is critical to how I approach my product. I think this is similar to my answer with about product ownership, and talking about product ownership and the difference between product management and product ownership. Ultimately, I think it's critical, and many times I try to build rich relationships with the engineering counterparts, because at the end of the day, they're the knowledge worker, they're the SMEs, and they're ultimately the people that creatively get the work done that they need to get done. So I've always have built strong relationships, understanding, what product can do better to improve their lives and their work, and for me to make sure that they understand the customer perspective. And so how I would define this is that, product management is really championing both business and customer needs, the discovery work, while the engineering teams, DevOps, and the product owner is really focused on execution, the how, making sure that they are, in tune with technology's best practices to achieve the how. And on the product side, we are constantly identifying what the what and the who is. And then versus product and user experience, I think they're just one and the same. Again, the end user experience is the product, really, at the end of the day. So really working closely with them to make sure that we are working and aligned to achieve the same. I think this really depends on what the organizational strategy is. In my in the organizations and the products I've managed, I think it came down to revenue growth, profitability, customer success metrics, and then there was ultimately then learning metrics. How do we make sure that the product is actually changing the behavior and teaching something to the organization? So there was many layers beyond just usage data, product data, and business data, but also learning data, which is tricky to measure in both the content and assessment side. And so I think that's really what we would need to do, is just identifying what those strategic targets are, what are the current kind of operational or analytic systems in place to measure that, and to make sure that wherever there are gaps, to make sure that we're achieving those gaps. And I think traditionally, there are organizational targets that we would want to measure to, but I think there's also some industry best practices. I think about customer success and NPS scores, for instance. There's industry best practices there, where even though the organization might have certain water lines, we'd want to continue to excel and just have an excellent product compared to the rest of the industry. I think I would first start, I think there's a number of assumptions in this question, but I think assuming that, that there was a product vision, product roadmap, backlog, and then ultimately there was a sprint backlog that still somehow missed the aims, is I would really take that upon myself, of being accountable for the misinformation and misdirection, first and foremost. I would then take it upon myself to set up some time with the team and just understand what they thought that they were doing really well with, and really trying to focus, I think, the tenor of the meeting on what they did well within the sprint and release, while then taking a step back, and identifying where the communication gaps were, and to understand how the team could do a better job and transferring requirements. But ultimately, I think I would first be accountable to the fact that if it ever got to a release and delivery point, and I had not yet seen the incremental work in progress, knowing that I wouldn't necessarily be as involved as a product owner, but I would take that upon myself and how distant I am from the team, because the whole point of an agile methodology is its incremental work. So these communication gaps are decreased, or at least large communication gaps and large releases are decreased, but ultimately create a meeting and environment to learn from it. Yes. So earlier on in my career at Pearson, even though I was a project manager of digital products and services, which combined kind of SaaS white labeled services, content, digital content, and then digital content within digital platform experiences, I started to develop my kind of business analyst side, which I think some think of as a PM or early versions of a PM. And then I kind of grew into a proper product management job at Pearson for two education platforms in the higher ed space. That was managing, with one platform, it was six Scrum teams. It was for over 24,000 educators, 600,000 students, yielding in about $60 million worth of revenue. In all my products and all my experiences, I was able and really had the chance to influence the overall product strategy. I take several approaches. One, I try to have kind of a flow system rather than a push system. So really understanding where the team is, and articulating where they see the opportunities are, and then just working also with all the customer insight learning systems to make sure that we're developing the business case for the right customer case to deliver the right strategy, and then the sequencing of that strategy. Because ultimately, I think I've been in situations where we've not necessarily been able to go after every customer idea, but where we were confined by business and technology. So I had to have a realistic vision combining the two. But ultimately, how I go after that strategy is really developing a strong sense of who the customer is, what they need, and what they need us to do for them, and how are they hiring our product to do what they need to achieve. And that's done by qualitative, quantitative metrics, a deep understanding of our market and customer segmentation with product performance, while also doing a lot of iterative testing, rapid proto-testing, A/B testing, to make sure that we are constantly embedding the customer voice in the development cycle, design cycle, in the ideation, design, and development cycle. I spoke to this earlier, but I tend to develop wireframes or designs and concepts. This has been really helpful in several ways. One, it's really giving a vision and something tactical and concrete to something that's in a customer's head or in a stakeholder's head. And so, really kind of stepping through the process of when they're asking for a specific feature or request, that it's okay, so there's several ways we could do this. How, why do you like this version versus the next? I think has been extremely helpful in rapid prototyping and being able to iterate quickly before we actually get it in front of any of the dev team as well. And I think what's also been really helpful to do is in the qualitative and quantitative research tactics, is to not lead with the solution, but to also first understand their world and what's hindering them. So if they're choosing our product, how are they thinking about time? How are they thinking about money? How are they, whatever those elements might be, to really understand where the trade-offs might be. And so I've also really have enjoyed introducing, force ranking in those discussions, so that they're able to really prioritize maybe which features over which. And that's how I've been able to really have a strong pulse on learned behavior versus customer need. And that's where I, bring that acumen and that instinct, while also skill set, to. I like a lot of the things you can't do with COVID right now. Restaurants, travel, hanging out with friends, having dinner parties, all of those things, and actually cooking for those dinner parties are things that I really enjoy. But the silver lining with COVID as well is I have a 9-month-old son this year. So though, we've lost out on a lot of things due to COVID, the joy of being able to be with him every day has been tremendous. And he also likes hiking, he likes birds and walking in nature. And so the ability to get out with him has been great. Yes, I confirm you may use this video for hiring and evaluation purposes.